Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping straight into what feels like a really pivotal moment concerning the conflict in Ukraine.
Yes, specifically this recent visit by several major European leaders to Kyiv.
Right, and it wasn't just any visit, was it? The timing, the context, it seems particularly significant.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. It happened just one day after Moscow's big Victory Day parade,
Yeah.
commemorating the World War II victory.
The very symbolic event in itself.
Hugely symbolic. And also the day after President Putin had hosted both President Xi Jinping of China and, interestingly, Slovak Prime Minister Fico.
So placing this European visit right after those events,
Mm-hmm.
it definitely feels like a statement.
It adds a whole layer of, let's say, strategic messaging. You can't really ignore that contrast.
Okay, so who exactly was involved in this delegation to Kyiv?
Well, we had French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and this was actually his first trip to Ukraine as chancellor.
Oh, interesting. His first visit in that role.
Yes. And British Prime Minister Keir Starmer was there too. Then, importantly, they were joined later by Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk.
So France, Germany, the UK, Poland. That's quite a lineup. Is this the first time these four have gone together?
It is. It marks really an unprecedented joint visit by the leaders of these four, major European powers to Ukraine during this conflict.
That unified front seems to be the core takeaway here.
Exactly. And that's what we want to unpack today. Not just report that it happened, but dig into the messages, the stated goals.
And the underlying implications, right? Given everything else happening geopolitically.
Precisely. We need to understand what this meeting actually means, especially for you, our listeners, trying to keep track of these important global events, maybe for exams like the UPSC or just to stay informed.
Okay, let's do that. So, starting with the basics. What were the main things these leaders actually said they wanted to achieve in Kyiv? What were the key messages?
Well, the headline message was definitely about increasing the pressure on Russia. They explicitly vowed to ratchet up pressure on Russia until a ceasefire could be agreed.
Ratchet up pressure. So, signaling potential intensification of their efforts.
That's the implication, yes. It suggests perhaps a new phase, or at least renewed resolve.
And I understand there was a specific proposal about a ceasefire.
There was. Just before they arrived, actually, they put out a joint statement, this was with the U.S. involved too, calling for a full and unconditional 30-day ceasefire.
30 days. Unconditional. What was the reasoning given for that?
The stated aim was to create the space for substantive talks aimed at securing a just and lasting peace. So it's positioned not just as a pause in fighting, but as a necessary window to actually start meaningful negotiations.
Right, so using the ceasefire as a bridge to something more permanent.
Exactly. They really emphasize their readiness to support peace talks as soon as possible. They seem prepared to get involved in the nitty-gritty, the technicalities of both the ceasefire itself and then, hopefully, a full peace deal.
So a proactive stance on facilitating those talks.
It appears so. And alongside that, they strongly restated Ukraine's fundamental rights.
Which are?
The right to prosper as a safe, secure, and sovereign nation within its internationally recognized borders. That's a consistent line, of course, but saying it together, these four leaders, gives it, extra weight.
And a warning attached.
Yes, a clear warning that support for Ukraine, military, financial, political, would continue and even increase until what they termed an enduring ceasefire is actually in place.
Enduring. Now, you mentioned the U.S. involvement in the statement, but they also specifically referenced President Trump's calls for a peace deal. That seems noteworthy.
It is quite strategic, isn't it? By saying they were backing President Trump's calls for a peace deal and urging Russia to stop obstructing efforts, they might be trying to, build a wider consensus.
Maybe trying to bridge some political divides internationally.
Potentially. Or show that the goal of peace isn't owned by one political faction. And of course, they immediately followed that by reiterating their steadfast commitment to Ukraine against what they called Russia's barbaric and illegal full-scale invasion. So branding it morally and legally again.
Okay, so that's the message from Kyiv. What was the immediate feedback, the reaction from Moscow?
Well, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov gave an interview to ABC News, and his response was pretty unambiguous.
Let me guess, not receptive.
Not immediately, no. He stated very clearly that Russia would only consider a ceasefire if arms deliveries to Ukraine from its allies stopped first.
So a major precondition right there. Stop the weapons flow.
Exactly. That's the barrier from their side.
Did he give a reason why? Why link the ceasefire directly to arms supplies?
His reasoning was essentially tactical. He argued a truce right now would mainly benefit Ukraine, especially because, in his assessment, Russian forces are currently advancing in quite a confident way.
So from their perspective, why pause when they feel they have momentum?
Precisely. He also added that Moscow believes Ukraine is not ready for immediate negotiations. So the overall picture painted is one where Russia feels it holds the advantage militarily and sees no reason to stop unless Western aid starts.
Okay, so a clear clash of perspectives there. Europe wants a ceasefire to enable talks. Russia wants arms supplies stopped before considering a ceasefire. Did the European leaders propose any next steps beyond the visit itself?
Yes, they did look ahead. One key proposal is to hold a virtual meeting soon with other European leaders.
To discuss what specifically?
The main topic would be creating some kind of dedicated European force for Ukraine's security, but specifically after the war.
A post-war security force. That sounds significant. What would it actually do?
The idea put forward is that this force would help regenerate Ukraine's armed forces after any peace deal and strengthen confidence in any future peace. So it's about long-term stability and rebuilding Ukraine's own defense capacity.
A long-term commitment then beyond just ending the fighting.
That seems to be the thinking. It acknowledges that peace on paper needs practical security guarantees.
And I think Macron mentioned a U.S.-Europe plan related to the immediate ceasefire too.
Yes, that's right. After talking with Tusk, he pushed for quickly developing a joint U.S.-Europe plan specifically for that 30-day truce idea.
And what would that plan involve? Just monitoring?
More than that, it seems. Macron suggested backing it up with the threat of massive economic sanctions that would kick in automatically if either side broke the ceasefire agreement.
Ah, so adding teeth to the proposal.
Yeah.
An enforcement mechanism.
Exactly. And sort of related to that, Finnish President Alexander Stubb also mentioned that the U.S. apparently already has 2 sanctions packages on the table, possibly targeting banking and energy sectors, which could be deployed.
Okay, so potential consequences are being discussed. Let's pull back a bit now. What about the bigger picture, the symbolism of this whole event?
Well, just the fact that this happened, this joint visit, more than 3 years after the full-scale invasion began. It says a lot about continued and now very unified European resolve.
It's a strong visual, these leaders together in Kyiv.
It really is, and it's hard, as Macron pointed out, not to contrast that image of unity with what he called Putin's defiant tone and belligerent comments back at the Moscow parade. 2 very different displays.
Did Macron offer any other insights into how they view Putin's stance right now?
He did make an interesting comment. While saying Putin clearly remains on the side of war, for now, Macron also hinted that discussions about territory might be possible later on.
But only after a ceasefire.
Yes, specifically after a ceasefire is achieved. So maybe a glimmer of a potential pathway down the line for the really tough issues, but certainly not immediate. And we have to remember the reality on the ground.
Which is?
Russia still occupies about 1/5 of Ukraine's territory, and as we discussed, Moscow hasn't shown any public sign of yielding to this ceasefire pressure yet.
And we also have those past comments from President Trump suggesting Ukraine might need to cede territory, which adds another layer of complexity, doesn't it?
It certainly does, although his more recent comments have also shown frustration with Russia not stopping the fighting. But yes, it highlights the different, sometimes conflicting, international perspectives on how this could end.
So the French official you mentioned earlier probably summed up the European intention best.
I think so. They saw the visit as demonstrating Europe's unity, strength, and responsiveness explicitly as a counterpoint to Putin's activities in Moscow. It's diplomacy, but it's also, symbolic assertion.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this deep dive up. What are the main takeaways for our listeners, maybe especially those preparing for UPSC or just trying to make sense of it all?
Well, I think there are a few key things. First, this clear, unified stance from France, Germany, the UK, and Poland, that's significant in itself. They're not just talking, they've put forward concrete ideas. The 30-day ceasefire backed by potential sanctions, and this longer-term plan for a European security force.
So a combination of immediate de-escalation efforts and future planning.
Exactly. But second, this is running up against a very firm Russian position, linking any pause to a halt in Western military aid, and seemingly confident about their current military situation.
Which really highlights the core challenge.
Absolutely. It underscores the huge complexity and the, frankly, deep-seated difficulties in finding a path to a resolution that works for everyone, or even just stops the fighting sustainably.
Indeed. And that really brings us to the final thought for you, our listener. As you follow this, especially if you're tracking international relations for exams or policy, consider that interplay. You've got the diplomatic pressure, you've got the military realities, and you've got these long-term security visions.
It's a dynamic mix.
It really is.
Yeah.
So what do you think are the biggest hurdles now to getting a lasting peace? And realistically, what role can this kind of international cooperation play when faced with those hurdles? These are tough questions with major implications.
Definitely questions worth pondering, analyzing the different factors and their weight.
Absolutely. If this discussion helped you explore those questions, please do give us a like, subscribe for more deep dives, and let us know your thoughts or any further questions in the comments. We do read them.
We appreciate the engagement.
And just to note, the information discussed today was primarily sourced from reporting by the BBC. Thank you for joining us.